Do you know how to quickly gauge the health of your animals? Do you know what the rumen can tell you about the digestion of your animals? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, so stick around. You ready?
Hey y'all, this is Doug.
I'm Melissa Hoffman with Mesquite Field Farm, one of two mentor farms with the AgriBility Battleground to Break Ground program. And we're here to show you how we farm on our 20-acre farm. If you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so that you know when we upload new videos.
Today we're going to talk about animal health, right? That's a big concern for all of our new farmers and even our experienced farmers. Mostly relating to cattle, and we'll talk a little about poultry as well. Our goal here is not to be prescriptive, but to give you some visual clues about the health of your animals. We'll be talking about the rumen triangle and what it can tell you about animal digestion. We will look at body condition by examining the ribs, eyes, nose, coat, and hooves, and we'll discuss demeanor, nursing mothers and calves, and then we'll talk about poultry.
I think we're also going to talk about external influences like weather.
Correct.
On the health of your animals.
Correct. We'll talk about poultry, both the layers and the broilers.
Yep.
And at last we'll talk about external influence to your animals' health, specifically the weather. Let's get started. Hip bones. The hip bone's there, and you can see that triangle. I'm going to find one of our cows that's more amenable to me touching her. Some of our older cows, it's more prevalent on. I apologize for the muddy mess. We've had inches of rain. We'll get into the muddy feet, but there's a lot of mud on her feet there. And if you look at them, her feet are separated one for the other, so it makes the triangle more noticeable between the hip bone between this bone and the ribs. You can see that triangle. Let me see if I can find one that's more prevalent. It's on the left side of the cow, and it should normally be concave as these cows are eating. We've got a lot of green grass right now along with mud, but because of the green grass, these guys are constantly feeding, so we have the triangles are doing exactly what they should do. After a cow is grazed, that triangle should be slightly convex, so curving outward as the proteins in the foods move into the rumen for processing in their stomach. It swells up and puffs out a little bit, and once it moves into the other part of the stomach, the other three chambers of the stomach, that triangle is concave. And I can show you on these bulls that are trying to push on each other right now, I can show you those triangles. It's usually more prevalent on the bulls because of how they process versus the cows themselves. So this cow is almost 7 years old, and you can see as she walks, you can see that triangle slightly, but she's been grazing this morning, so it's not as concave. Let's see if I can find one that is. You have the same triangle on the right side, but that's not the rumen side. So you can see the triangle on this young cow here. This guy here, you can see it on the right side. We'll move around to his other side. His feet are separated slightly, but you can see that triangle there, and there. And I can't get my fist all the way into it up to the wrist. So this guy's been eating and processing and doing all the things he needs to do. So this is a good rumen triangle for one of your cows. When they eat, this will puff out and come out to about this distance as they process in that first chamber of the stomach, and then it moves to the other side. The left side is the side we're really focused on. If it's spongy, like convex and spongy, like you can push, this one is not spongy, but if you can push on it and it feels like air, that's a good indicator of bloat. And can cause you some problems very quickly. You will know if your animal is bloated. That first indicator would be here, where you get that sponginess. But their body size, if you look at them from the rear, would be about 4 times that width if they're in the last phase of bloat, where they're about to die. Basically, bloat is fermentation in the rumen, and there's no way for that gas to escape. So the animal just blows up, and the pressure inside upon the internal organs, the lungs, will cause that animal to die. There's a good shot of his rumen triangle. The second thing that we want you to look at is, if you notice, his ribs are not really visible. And there is a chart, for a body quality chart, that we're putting in here, but you can't really see his ribs. They're not really defined and showing. This animal would be considered between a 3 and a 4. He's got good quality. You can feel the ribs, but there's a layer of fat over the top of them. So this is a good animal. And this is the good quality. And even though he's a bull, and bulls usually look a little bit worse, or can look worse, he's looking good. You look at the eyes, of course, we've been raining for days, and I want to talk about body quality on nursing or on mothers as well. But her eyes are clear. They're not pink and red. There's no weeping coming out from underneath, long trails of tears running down her face. So she looks good. Let's talk about pregnant cows. This cow that we're looking at now, who is good, her rumen triangle is good, her ribs are good, but I'm going to slip around to the other side and catch the rumen triangle on her, because her first set of calves were twins, and that does some things to the body quality of a new cow. Her rumen triangle looks great, but usually she looks pretty rough. She looks like she's around a 2, but in all actuality, her body has adapted itself to delivering those first those twin calves. So her rumen, her hip bones are usually out wider. The girth of her body is wider than it normally would have been if she'd only had a single cow. As she was growing, I think she was 20 months when she had that first set of twins. So that has a permanent impact on her body. She's always going to look a little different than the others as far as body quality. And all these guys, their noses, you want them to be wet. You don't want them dripping and running liquids out their nose. That usually indicates that there can be a problem with them. But if I can get one of them to stop, where I can get a close up of their nose. So he's got a wet nose, which is good. He's not dripping stuff out of his face, so he looks really good. Let's talk about mud. We've had between 12 and 16 inches of rain in the last few hours. As you can see, they've beaten up the ground, but look at their feet, look at the hooves. The mud squishes up between their toes. As they walk across these roads like this, they can pick up rocks. So you may see an animal that looks lame, that's limping, like that one is now. She's limping. She's got a bunch of mud in her hooves. She is right there. She's got mud in her hooves and probably a rock stuck inside of there. So you need to keep an eye on her, either depending on how you work your animals. If you want to move her into a corral and into a chute, you could move her in and clean her hooves out. But it's not going to help right now. As you can see, the ground is just saturated. So just keep an eye on those animals. Make sure that those things come out on their own. If not, you may have to move them into a chute and clean out their hooves. Hoof rot. This cow, which we're not going to be able to see, we may not be able to see it, is notorious for having split hooves and hoof rot. When they walk around in moisture like this all the time, it can cause the hooves to get infected, and then it'll blow out and split the top of the hoof. Now you've got an infection problem and a lame walking cow. So there are things you can do. You can go to a veterinarian. You can get LA200. You can get injections or products for that. But you'd have to move her into a chute, clean that thing up, and work on making sure there's no infection. As you see, these cows are all working in a herd. They're moving around grazing how they want to graze. Calves are with them, the mamas. They actually do assign babysitters, but that's a different topic for later. These guys are all grazing. There's nobody really isolated except the alpha female, which is over there, but they're all still part of the herd. There's nobody standing off by themselves. There's no, somebody's not laying down somewhere being very lethargic, far away from the herd. If that occurs, it can be a couple of things, right? It could be illness or it could be calving, right? She may be preparing to drop a calf. So she's by herself and isolated and doesn't want anybody around her. Also in your demeanor, you can watch for, you get used to these cows if your herd's as small as ours are. You begin to know whose behavior is what. So this is the mama and her calf. She could get rather agitated with me for being here, but usually she doesn't, as long as I'm not between her and the calf. But these others are not. So you get used to the behavior of your cows. And when something changes in that behavior, there's usually a reason, and you need to see what it is. It may be, they may have rock in their hooves. They may have eaten something that's not working well in their rumen. They may have an illness that you have to track and treat. So understanding your animals is important, and their normal behavior. And these things that we're discussing are things that over time will become second nature to you, and it will be faster for you to notice an animal that's behaving differently or that has a problem rather than understanding the health of all of them. You'll just know what's normal. Nursing mothers. So she's doing really well. Her udder is full for her. Her rumen looks good. Body quality looks good. Her ribs are not present. Her calf is eating. Their nutrition for nursing mothers is quite different, and they require additional protein. So right now we have all of this grass, so she's getting all the nutrition she needs for that calf to feed that calf and herself and maintain her health and the calf's health. And as I mentioned with, where'd she go? Patty is the cow that had twins first. I mentioned the body quality problems that you can have with her. You have to understand what those things are in your livestock. So I know that she gave birth to twins first. So her body is a little bit wider than normal, and I noticed those things after she weaned that calf. So her body quality has always looked slightly less than everyone else's because everything was distended and pushed out of place early in her life. There's another mama and a calf, and that's been the most interesting of the calves ever born on our farm. His hair quality was different. We've never had one that felt like a Brillo pad, but his hair really does feel like a Brillo pad. And I expected that would change shortly, within a couple of weeks, and it is starting to change. But when his hair was all curly, he would rub up against something and just peel off sections of his hair. And you can see his tail is bare at the bottom. I'm not sure what caused that to happen, if somebody stepped on him or he just chewed on it or what he did. But his body quality, as they grow fast, right? So his rumen triangle isn't going to look the same. They're always going to look lanky and lean, but watch them, look at their ears, they're alert, they're up and moving. Sometimes these guys can take a little while, the day after they're born or the day they're born. They don't necessarily jump up like we expect that they should. So you might see one that lays around for a few days longer than the others, and then all of a sudden he's no longer lethargic. He jumps up and runs and plays. So you just have to look at those things. His body quality is good. You can't see his ribs. His ears are good, his face is good, there's no deformation. He walks and runs and plays just fine. But you need to see those things and understand them. That calf to the right over here is 2 weeks older than the young one there. So his body quality is good. There's his rumen on the left. It's slightly concave. Cannot see his ribs. There's no deformed legs or hooves. His face is good. His mouth is good. And let's talk about nursing. These young calves, when they nurse, these guys have already nursed this morning. They may try it again. But there are some wives' tales that are indicators. Oh, there's another one. That are indicators to whether they're getting milk or not. So if you don't want to go disturb mama, if you have one that's got a very small udder and you're not sure that calf is getting the nutrition, you might go down the path of trying to bottle feed that baby, and that can be a painful process. Occasionally, if the mama's good, you can bottle feed them and turn them back loose and they'll go with mama. But this is her calf here. That's the mama there. She has a very small udder and has for many years. So we always thought he was getting Happy Meals. Originally, we thought he wasn't getting any milk at all. But he actually was. He was just getting 50 Happy Meals a day. And her calves have always been good. So we didn't have to worry about it. But the first year, her first calf, we really struggled with, do we bottle feed this thing? And we went through some nightmares trying to catch that calf, get it away from her without getting trampled to death by her. So those things that people talk about is that tail, right? If they're getting milk, when they're attempting to nurse, that little tail will just wag back and forth, and usually that is the case, but not always. What we're always looking for is to get around on the other side where we can see that mouth wrapped around the teat, and we can see if there's white in his mouth. See, she's got a small udder, and she's feeding him just fine. So yeah, we want to see that there's milk coming out of his mouth, and that used to be, it was a conversation usually talked about calf slobber or meringue for a pie. We always called it calf slobber as well. So we want to see that there's some milk coming out of his mouth. We want to see that white in his mouth as he's drinking. And then you got to watch the quality, right? Make sure that he's getting enough. If he starts mooing and trying to hit mama's bag, trying to get more milk to come out, then he may not be getting enough, but you need to watch his body quality to understand that. Psycho, she is our 9-year-old cow and probably the most valuable asset. She's produced us a calf every year, but as you can see from behind in her body quality, her hip bones, those bones are really protruding, right? So you can't see around them, but she's delivered 9 calves in her lifetime. So she's standing not with her feet together, so it's going to be more pronounced in this triangle right here. As you can see, she's good. Her ribs, you're not seeing her ribs. That's slightly concave, which is exactly where you want it. If I could stick my fist in there and get it in up to my wrist, then we'd be having a problem. She would be very, very malnutrition and starving, but she's a great cow and we don't have that problem. This is a nursing mother here, Sue, the one we were discussing with the small udder. That's her calf right there. As you can see, as she moves, her rumen triangle is good too. Her feet are separated. She will actually try to run me over. So there's her rumen triangle. It's in good shape too. Her ribs are good. You're not seeing those ribs delineated all the way down her back. This is Kara. She is a nursing mama. You can see her feet are not together either, but you can see her ribs slightly. She's a first-year heifer. You can see her slightly concave, a little more than I would like, but she's just now starting to eat. She's been feeding. Her ribs are good. She's got a good layer of fat, and if you look at her and compare her to the chart that you'll see later in the video, she looks great. She's wide in the hip. You can see where the tail meets the butt, there's a layer of fat right there. Right there and right there. That you want that fat. That tells you that her body quality is good as well. She's doing great by this afternoon, she'll look awesome with all this green grass. But you can see the room in there. It's a little deep, but her feet are spread. But she'll be fine. And because she's a nursing mom, she's going through a lot more nutrients that she needs to feed that calf. So their body quality may look a little bit less than prime for what you're after in your operation, but she's just fine. And it just takes time to figure that out in your livestock and how they work for your cows.
So next we're going to talk about poop. I think we call it poopology.
Poopology.
So just like humans, poop can be a very telling indicator of your health and what you need in your diet. Aside from obvious indicators like having worms in your poop, in the cattle's poop, which is clearly there's a problem there. The consistency of the poop can tell you a lot about what they need. So let's take a look at that. So this is an older poop. As you can see, it's pretty high. It's got defined clumps on it. This is an older one, but our cows have been getting a lot of protein lately, so they're hard to find right now. But so separated individual parts, piled very high. Let's see if I can get down here so you can see how high that is. So this is an example of a cow having too much fibrous material in his poop, which means you're going to want to supplement them with some additional protein. And they're in the form of grass or cubes. And this here is the Goldilocks of poops. What you're looking for is something that looks like pumpkin pie. Smooth, relatively smooth consistency on top, round circle. This tells us that the cow has a nice balance of protein and fiber in their diet. And this is what we call the perfect poop, the Goldilocks of poop. Here's an example of a poop where at first glance you might think it was good because it looks like pumpkin pie. However, as we step out, you start to see that there is several other spots where it looks very runny. So this is an indication of a cow that's had way too much protein, and we need to supplement its diet with some roughage in the form of hay.
Let's circle back for a moment to body condition. Here's a chart that describes body condition scoring in cows. We try to aim somewhere between a 3 and a 4 for our herd. Others say we should stay between a 2 and a 3, but we really like 3 and 4. If we examine our cows and see them above or below that, we'll adjust their feeding, right? So we'll either change the paddocks that they're in, adjust the diet that we're working with them. This is not an exact science. It's simply a guideline to help you get a feel for gauging your animal's health and to be able to make better management decisions for your herd, right? So as you do this more and more, it becomes second nature to you to look at these things when you drive past your herd in the morning or at some point when you're feeding and you just happen to have a few extra minutes as you glance through your herd. Paying attention to these things that we're going to discuss today will give you a quick down and dirty method for understanding whether your animals are in good health or if there's something you need to watch.
And I think there was something really good that you pointed out to me earlier where it's like you get to a point where there's a normal and you look for those things so consistently that it's really easy for you to see when something is off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If you're constantly watching for these things.
Yeah, it's easy to spot. Pretty soon you're not looking at the whole herd. You don't even recognize it. What you recognize is the one that's not performing like the rest. And it's a very quick check, and you can do it while you're driving down the road or you just happen to see all your cows grazing.
You're moving them in the pasture to the next pasture or whatnot.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so now let's talk chickens. Chickens tend to be a little tougher to catch issues in time to really do something about it. We have a saying, and I mentioned it in the video too, where the smaller the animal on your farm, the faster it's trying to die. And it's just kind of been our experience where things happen so quick with these smaller animals that it's really difficult sometimes to catch them. But again, if you get into the space where you see them every day, you're watching them every day, you can notice when there's something off about them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's check out the layers. So we're going to talk a little bit about layers and layer health. Again, we're not trying to be prescriptive. We're just trying to give you ideas, things to look out for so that you can quickly notice and gauge the health of your animals. So with chickens, especially layers, you want to make sure that their combs are bright and red. they start getting pale, you might have an issue. So you want to look into that. You want to make sure that they're nice and active. They're not lethargic. If they get lethargic, that could be an indication of a problem. And you want to keep an eye out on their feathers here. As long as they're nice and healthy looking, they're not falling out all over the place, you're good. The thing with chickens, and I have a theory that the smaller the animal, the faster it's trying to die on your farm. So the thing with chickens is that sometimes by the time you realize that there's a problem, it's too late. So as soon as you notice an issue, I would suggest quarantining that animal and supplementing its feed, making sure, of course, you always want to make sure your animals have clean, fresh water. But really important when you notice that you have a chicken that's having some issues. If it's not eating, that's another problem. Also, if they're sneezing or having a hard time breathing, that could be an indication of an issue. Sometimes it's a respiratory infection, but it could also be gapeworm. So you want to make sure you address those individually and keep an eye out for that. Hi, pretty mama. You want me to put you down now, huh? Let's talk about broilers now. We don't currently have any broilers out on pasture, so I don't have any video to show you there. We won't be starting up our next batch until the fall. But I do want to talk about them a little bit. In the past, we've raised Cornish cross, and it's not a breed that I prefer to raise because they're bred in a way to put on a lot of white meat because that's what the customers tend to prefer. But as a result of that, they can have a multitude of health issues. I mean, they could literally just be standing there and have a heart attack and keel over, and it's kind of disturbing. But one of the ways we kind of mitigate that a little bit on our farm is we don't free feed our birds, our pastured poultry. They get fed once a day or twice a day. And so they don't gorge themselves, and they tend to have fewer issues. They walk until the very end. Sometimes you see where Cornish crosses can't even walk until the end. So it's a little trickier. There are other breeds that do better free ranging and do better out on pasture and grazing, but what you gain for in that and better health, you lose in breast meat for your customers. So it's something you have to make a decision about. So with the Cornish crosses, they tend to have a lot of issues. Keep an eye on them, but if there's some indicators there that can tell you if you need to make some changes to their habitat or what they're eating and so on and so forth. So if you happen to see that they're all bunching up on each other and they're crowding each other in a corner of their tractor or in their brooder, that's an indicator that they're cold. So if they're in the brooder, add a heat lamp. If they're out on pasture in the tractor, maybe put another cover down, a tarp down on the other end of the tractor. Get them out of shade if they're in the shade, that sort of thing. Get them out of the wind. If they're spread out very far, they're panting or something to that effect, they're overheated. And truly, I think that the temperatures are what really impact broilers, other than flooding. But if they're spread out like that, you want to make sure you can get them some shade. If you can turn them to where they're catching a breeze and catching some wind, and making sure that they really have clean, cool water to help cool them off.
And if they're in a brooder, you can turn the light off, right? So
correct.
Turn the light off, and if your brooder is a galvanized trough or something that doesn't allow air circulation in, you can get an ammonia buildup just at the head level of the bird. So if you put a fan that blows air across the top of that brooder, it'll suck that ammonia out of there and cool them off at the same time.
Right. Those tend to be if you can, for broilers, if you can really manage and moderate the temperature that they're at, they tend to handle things a little bit better. So yeah, that leads us into the last part of our discussion, which is the weather impacts on your livestock.
Yeah, so, and it's not livestock, it's poultry as well.
Well,
I mean, it's
your
pretty,
animal, your birds.
I mean, humans too.
Yes.
Right? We just don't discuss it. So in this part of the discussion, weather is really important. So for livestock, we don't have livestock shelter, right? So we don't have shelter sitting out there that they can go walk into. But in the development of our farm, we left some trees, we're growing some new trees, but we also made sure that we had a place where the cows could get in inclement weather to block themselves. And we've been through hurricanes and things like that. So those three things that can impact them are cold, wind, and rain. So cows can handle any two of those three before you start having a real problem, right? They can deal with cold and they can deal with some wind. But if you get them wet, cold, with wind blowing across the top of them, it sucks the body heat off of them and you start having problems with your livestock. So when you're doing your planning of where you're going to graze, if you don't have shelters, make sure that you have a berm that they can get by that blocks the north, northeast, northwest wind and allows it to flow over the top of them versus hitting their bodies directly. So they may get that, they may not get wind and they'll get the cold and some rain or some sleet or snow, but they'll be okay. They can handle that as long as you maintain fresh water. So any two of those three things are good for livestock. For poultry, that's a little different. Poultry can really usually only handle one of those, the three items that we discussed, cold, wind, and rain. So if you've got them in a tractor or in a chicken house that you can keep the wind and rain off of them, that's good. They can survive with cold. But if you start adding, if you've got wind blowing rain inside of there that's soaking the birds, they may not be getting the wind directly, but they may be getting the water and the cold. You're going to start losing birds. It's very fast, and as Melissa stated earlier, in the smaller animals, they can't deal with that very long. So cold, wind, and rain. If you can manage your environment for livestock to have only two of those three in inclement conditions, you're good. For poultry, one of those conditions can be handled okay. You may lose some body quality, but you're not going to lose the bird. And that leads us to you.
That's it. That's all we have for you guys today. Again, none of these tips, ideas are prescriptive. We're not veterinarians. They're just things that we use to gauge and manage the health of our animals on our farm. And we hope that they're ideas that are going to be super helpful for you. If you have any questions or if you have any tips or tricks that you utilize for the same thing, please feel free to leave a comment down below and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.